All right, great. Thanks so much for joining me this afternoon, Michelle.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Yeah, I'm super excited. So let's jump right in. We're going to come out of the gate talking about the tummy time method. So let's just start there. What is that exactly, and why is it so important for infants?
Okay, the tummy time method is a specific sequence way to do a whole body movement, including tummy time for pre-crawling babies. Now, I developed this many years ago, and
Hmm.
it was specifically for babies I was working with who had all of the symptoms that our babies right now have, such as persistent asymmetries, meaning looking one way more than another, who were having a difficulty balancing their postural muscles and having stiffness and imbalanced tension, and maybe even were crying a lot and didn't really want to do it at all. And we all know tummy time is important. So
Hmm.
anyway, it's a specific way of doing tummy time and problem solving it, etc. Now, what I do is, and how I learned to do it was really just working with babies and noticing what was natural for them. So it
Okay.
is based on natural development, and it's very what we call co-regulated in the sense that we're working with the baby to stay. We're going to make it intense a little bit because that's what we all need to develop, but we're not going to make it too intense. It's not torture time. We make it so that it's actually doable and enjoyable.
Hmm.
And I think, it's important for babies because we live in a culture that doesn't really support tummy time that much and doesn't give us a lot of support around that. And we know
Hmm.
it's so important, and our babies are sleeping on their backs. And that's fine for back to sleep, but we need to really balance that out by doing enough during the day. And that's difficult to do for a variety of reasons. And so having a way to do it
Hmm.
helps us get her done, and knowing that we're doing it well and feeling good, like, hey, I did that and that mattered.
Right.
For a parent, I think is really important. I remember back, just being a young parent myself, like, I'm willing to do this. This matters. I can see changes. It's really important. And so many of the babies that we see have problems with their posture, their tongue, or their mouth, or their breathing, or their GI, or their airway.
Hmm.
And so it's working all those muscles to balance it and really mature the nervous system in a really good way that does that from a naturally um, development perspective.
How many times a day should we be doing that with our babies?
That's a good question. I mean, tummy time we talk about, we like to do it for very short, frequent times. So like
Okay.
3 to 5 times a day or so. And really what the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends is time, so many times, or they say break it up, and it's good. But I think the most important thing, and what I've seen over time, babies be successful, is just not having a big expectation that they do it for a long time, but just do it really frequently for short periods of time. And even like if a baby is at the maximal, like not having a good time in tummy time, what we usually say is do it every diaper change. So we'll say every
Oh,
diaper change, you lay them down, just roll them over for 5, 6 seconds, pick them back up, snap them. And that's a good reminder because we do a lot of diaper changes.
that
And that's
is
a
true.
great way to get a ton of tummy time in with very little adding extra to our day, too.
Yeah,
And babies get used to it when they know, hey, I don't have to be here forever. And these little bitty bites throughout the day help so much.
that makes sense. Man, I wish I had known that. Jeez. Um, yeah, a little
There's
late
so much
now,
we could say that about, I think. But
right?
that's
Yeah.
what's so fun about these conversations because we can pass, things along and
Hmm.
grow our network in that situation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, and I'll put the link to all of the things we're going to talk about in the show notes. But on your website, you talk a little bit about compensatory and is it, I don't know if I'm supposed to be saying novel or novel
Novel.
movements. Okay. So what are they?
That's a great question. Compensatory movements are things that we do because we couldn't do it how we were going to do it. So, for example,
Okay.
if you have restrictions of your tongue,
Hmm.
and the tongue is supposed to do so many different things, and say it's inhibited by a tie or some other type of muscle dysfunction, And so we still need to eat and breathe and do all those things. So the other muscles and other parts of the neck and the shoulders will compensate. So they'll help. They'll jump in and they'll lend a hand and do more to compensate for that. So what we see is that if we stay in our compensatory strategies and we don't ever do anything new, which is what novel movements are, making new movements, then that's what persists over time as oral dysfunction. And that's where we see like kind of a lack of progress or plateauing type of thing. And, novel movements are new movements. So a lot of times for babies in the pre-crawling period where I really work with babies is sometimes that's eliciting reflexes. Because reflexes require a sensory input, such as putting your finger into the palm the baby grasps.
Right.
This grasping is a reflex, but there is a stimulus to that. So we will provide the right stimulus and input to make sure these reflexes are working. But the other thing we're trying to elicit novel movements is for volitional movements. And that means these are movements that the baby does on their own, autonomously, in generation with engagement in the environment. And yes, babies have volitional movements.
Okay. Like what?
Well, it could be anything, swiping, reaching, orienting, grasping, and so they're exploring a texture or something in their peripheral vision. Yeah.
Okay.
And they're not the most sophisticated movements that babies have, but they are there. And that's what is increasing as they mature. So for example, when we're born, we have a small repertoire of volitional movements, but by 6 months, we have a large repertoire. And reflexes at birth, we have a large repertoire. And by 6 months, we want to have very few working for us.
Okay.
But integration process, using those, and they go into the foundational nature of our brain and our neuromuscular development, but they're not as like stimulus response that, we switch over into the volitional system. So it's really important when it comes to not just the tongue and the lips and how we maintain our upper airway patency, but our posture and how we move in the gravitational field and how that experience feels to us and how that stimulates for babies. We got to put ourselves in this, that curiosity, that burning desire to explore the environment.
Right. Touch everything, put it in your mouth, of course, right? Because that's what they do. Yeah, exactly.
Get into it. Put it all in your mouth. Make sense of it.
And that's what they're doing, right? And is this really at the core of why tummy time is so important? Because I'll totally come clean. I did it because I was told to do it. I didn't understand why I was doing it, but I did it. It's not just for this oral. I mean, is it for brain development and what is that why we're doing tummy time?
Well, and that's a good question because there's a little bit the difference between general tummy time and tummy time method. So tummy time method is this really specific sequence. It's actually a whole sequence of movements and transitional movements. Yeah. And a way of doing it that follows the baby all the way until they're crawling. And versus tummy time itself is just being in the position of prone. So which is still good. But they're different.
So this is more intentional.
Yeah, and it's like a specific way, and it's not just prone, which is another word for tummy time. But tummy time is still prone is still an overall important position for all babies to assume and to achieve. And so we have been focused, and because we knew with the back to sleep that came out in 1992-ish. And at the same exact time, Tummy to Play came out because they had the foresight and the wisdom to say, hey, if we're going to do back to sleep, we need to counteract that with Tummy to Play. They just didn't foresee the difficulties that babies were going to do. And I was a young occupational therapist. I graduated in 1996. I started working in peds right away. And I had a baby in 1998. So that was a big, eye opener for me. And then another baby in 2001 and another baby in 2003. And so all along, growing, and I was working in the NICU at this time and an infant developmental follow-up clinic. And all of these, was being saturated into me, this development from every level over time, long
Right.
trajectories, high acuity, et cetera. So I knew that it was more about sensory processing, which I'm
Mhm.
getting way around to your question now. I
Yeah.
can get a little long-winded, but about
No, you're
sensory
good.
processing and I'm an occupational therapist. So what does sensory processing mean? I think a lot of us know a little bit about it because it's gotten out there into social media and other outlets, and a lot of really good blogs and a lot of good therapists putting things out. But that's how we have all of our senses and how we perceive them. So it's
Hmm.
not just eyesight and smell and hear, but it's balance and orientation, and it's movement directionality, and it's a feeling of our insides, and it's all these different things. So vestibular is our kind of balance and orienting, and that is where things can really get a baby having difficulty with tummy time. So that's why it's really good to work it out with someone, because just trying to get through the tummy time thing without really working through it or avoiding it, we're
Hmm.
not really avoiding the problems. We'll meet them a little bit later.
Okay. And this is something all babies should do. I say should, but it would
Well,
benefit all babies, or is it just a specific group of babies that this would benefit?
yeah, it benefits all babies, and mainly because what I think is cool that it's also I've developed tummy time method to be sort of play therapy. So it organizes the activity. And that's how, we kind of play and just relate. And um, I know I enjoy sitting at the piano and just, plunking along, but it's so much more enjoyable when I've learned the notes and where to place my hands and how to
Hmm.
move them on the keys, and a little bit. I don't have to be a professional, but I
Right.
can sort of connect the music to my fingers and just know a little bit more about it. And so that was where I was going with it, with developing this specific technique. And I think as another thing about occupational therapists is we love to break down activities. We call it activity analysis. And so we'll take something and look at it and do an analysis. And sometimes it's about ergonomics and about how could we do this so that it's better for your body. It's for, even to the point where we conserve our energy or our joint protection, et cetera. And or how could we do this so that you can build more strength or have more challenge and adapt and modify that. So that's what's also built into it, because every baby's different. And even though it's kind of
Hmm.
like a little cookie cutterish in the way that we do it, it's individualized to each baby because of their response to it. And
Okay.
that's why I think every baby can benefit from it.
Which makes
And
total
I've trained
sense.
a bunch of people. So, we tried, and I try to keep up with getting them listed on the website. But
And it's something that if a parent comes in and they start working with you, um, obviously they're going to sit and do it with their baby at home, but then they would have just check-ins with you periodically, or how does that process typically work?
yeah, my favorite way to do this is in groups, and to
Okay.
do it like a group of four, meet weekly
Hmm.
with several babies and parents coming and doing this together, that's the most
Okay.
exquisite. And I did that for so many years here. And I do even from time to time, but I did it like every Thursday at 9:45 for 8 years. And it was on a solid for me. And it was like breathing. And I was so rewarded from that, learning about the benefits of it. Because I thought, oh, this is going to be great for parents. And it really was. They became friends, and you could see them supporting each other. And I didn't have to do much supporting because they did it themselves. And as this is going to be good because we're going to get, parents doing the hands-on thing. Because I know therapists, we train to be good with babies. We practice to be good with babies. We have a
Sure.
lot of experience with it. But the reality is like parents need, want to know how to do things with their babies
Mm-hmm.
expertly and well,
Right.
and that's just the height of really good parenting and simple things. So I thought that was this, but I underestimated, I did not count on how the babies would love each other, would look for
Wow.
each other. Yes,
See
and
what
would pay
they're
attention
doing.
during
Wow.
tummy time because we're a class always in a circle.
Uh-huh.
And I did not. And so that has always touched my heart, over the years, seeing that in different age groups, because, we'll do sometimes an older baby group and then a younger baby group. And I see it across the ages.
Mm.
And it's very exquisite. And all of those things are really good. But then you can do it one-on-one. And what's really good about this, you can also do what we call teletummies, and you can do it online and meet
Oh,
like
okay.
we're doing, now.
Right.
Because the deal is we work with our baby doll.
Ah, okay.
And we'll show you with our baby doll. So when we're teaching tummy time method, we should have our baby doll.
And about what age do they start typically?
Well, we have a prenatal program where you can practice with the doll baby before, and then the first 2 weeks after birth, most of it's right here. Okay, all the
Right.
tummy time is up on the chest, and we're doing it here. And then after that, so about 2 weeks, we want to start thinking about the firm, flat surface and beginning to explore
Oh,
the
wow, that's
gravitational field
soon.
a little bit different. Yeah. And again, it's these little short periods of time. They're super sweet and always dialed into what the baby needs. And if I am ever able to reach parents in a way, and I love this is a great way for me to reach parents, but if I could ever like get my point across, is that what our babies really need is this movement, prolific life. They
Okay.
need to struggle in the gravitational field. They need to be able to move their head anti-gravity. They need to be able to turn their head easily side to side most of the time, because that turning side to side and also organizing around the midline here is going to be dependent upon what's going on with the tongue and the
Hmm.
airway.
Got it. Got it.
Because most of the time when you like head turning preference to one side, it's because of the airway patency.
Well, and I guess that kind of leads into another question that I had, because we talk a lot about tongue ties and things like that on here and airway and jaw development, but how specifically does the tummy time method help with tongue ties or lip ties and those kind of restrictions?
Well, I appreciate all this opportunity to talk about TummyTime method, but really it's because it's specific to getting cranial nerves moving, the muscles of
Okay.
the cranial nerves with the face and the neck and the tongue and the head and the shoulder girdle, but it's
Okay.
also whole body. And it's eliminating compensatory strategies and eliciting those novel movements, the new movements that take over, that are more functional, that generate suction, that have efficient milk transfer, that keep the tongue up and keep the airway nice and
Mm,
huge so
got
that
it.
breath comes in and out, and that the tongue feels like it can float to the roof of the mouth, and it doesn't have to be bunched and humpy and retracted
Mhm.
in the back as a compensatory strategy, right? And we need that to happen. Now, one of my other things I'd like to touch base with parents is because there's a lot of talk about tension
Okay.
and eradicating tension. And I just want to understand tension a little bit more.
Okay.
And we need tension in the body. Tension is movement. So we don't want to ever eradicate tension. What we're noticing is imbalanced tension, tensional imbalances in the body, and a lack of soft tissue integrity,
Okay.
but they're compensatory in nature, such as these persistent asymmetries in pulling to one side. That has body-wide effects, and it's felt as tension, but it's really the baby's nervous system struggling for stability. It doesn't have it on the kind of both sides, right? And in the 3 dimension. So it's pulling and it's overacting overholding, because these compensatory muscles, again, they weren't really supposed to be doing all of the tongue's work. So it's really complicated too, because just like whole body movement is individualized, babies' temperament and even their ability, even how their GI feels, because some babies don't have a lot of GI issues. Even if they're
Right.
maybe burping up a little bit and they're not really upset, some babies are really feeling that and having significant dysregulation. And that's what I call interoceptive
Okay.
disruption. There's a fancy word for, I feel, like my GI tract is disgruntled. There's
Got it.
chaotic signals coming out of our belly. And sometimes that's because of bowel motility or reflux or trapped gases or air from air swallowing, or improper suck, swallow, breathe coordination.
And are there movements and things that we can do with our babies when, to help with all of that?
Yeah, and that's where you say, like, any tummy time, if you get the baby relaxed on their belly, that will help with some of that, because it
Okay.
gives the optimal. But also that's where keeping them upright against your body. But again,
Hmm.
they're putting a little bit of pressure on the front of their body, which would be sort of like tummy time on your chest. But, I think that, um, movement in general is important, but babies will often have difficulty with, say, burping. So
Hmm.
even if they're
Right.
swallowing even a normal amount of air, which would be minimal, hopefully, but all babies burp just a teeny tiny bit, and it's really difficult to get it up. And for some babies that causes significant reflux,
Hmm.
and for other babies they just twist their bodies and contort and kind of hold their breath a little bit. And so all these different ways are how the baby then learns to respond, and then it
Okay.
becomes a habit. So how we balance all of these tensional problems is to really equip the baby with new movement. That's the novel movement, so that they are then equipped with this other thing, and all of these other compensatory strategies can sort of just fall away
Okay.
because it's more balanced, because we can
Hmm.
organize around the midline, because we can
Okay.
turn both ways, because we can keep our airway open by elevating our tongue to the roof of the mouth. And for
That.
babies, it's particularly, I mean, it's their neurodevelopmental challenge. It's the appropriate thing, but you got to remember they're developing head control. We have developed head control, so we don't
Hmm.
remember even what that's like, that they're working on keeping their upper airway patency at the same time that their head is the heaviest part of their body
Hmm.
and they don't have head control.
Right.
So
Right.
that's why it's perceived as tension, but we want tension in the body. We just want it to be balanced. We want it to be
Okay.
optimal.
Okay.
And that a lot of times means we need to equip with a new movement. We need to get the baby moving in new directions, equipping with strength, and let the muscle tone really inhabit the muscles. Also working with, from the standpoint of airway and breathing, slowing down usually the breathing rate.
Okay. Slowing down the
And
baby's breathing.
exactly. And guess what the best way really to do that? Singing, having the parents singing.
Really?
Right. Because everything in like the polyvagal and all of the parasympathetic talk is about the lengthy exhale, is what lowers our heart rate. The
Hmm.
lengthy exhale lowers our respiratory rate. And so when we're singing, we're exhaling. La, 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 la. And so we are calming down in the sense of our physiology. It's as simple as our physiology sometimes to lower our heart rate and our respiratory rate. And the baby does as well,
They pick
follows
up on
that.
it. Hmm. Ah. Okay.
Yeah. And then when the baby's breathing slows down, then you can feel that sense of tension a lot of times will be gone in many areas. You're like, well, where did that go? Well, that's
Hmm.
because the what you perceive as tension is just the nervous system over recruiting.
Got it.
But it almost has to over recruit if you're breathing fast. That's a fight or flight state.
Yeah, it's a safety thing, right? Right. All right. Well, let's shift gears just a little bit,
Okay.
and focus on breastfeeding specifically.
Hmm.
Um, I just, we've talked about it on some other podcasts, but just I would like to get your take on, why it's so important for infant development, and what are some of the options available for new moms, especially those that are experiencing issues with breastfeeding?
Well, the number one thing I want to say is please work with an IBCLC or the highest trained lactation expert in your area, because it really is the one-on-one support and problem solving and collaboration and really teamwork and counseling. It's worth it. And honestly, our insurance companies should be able to reimburse that. That's one of those things. So that's my number one thing to say. There's other tips and tricks that we could say, but that is the absolute most important thing. But breastfeeding itself it's beyond sleeping, okay, which is the baby's primary occupation and activity of daily living. Eating and feeding and receiving human milk is the biggest thing they've got going. It's their activity of daily living. It is their primary occupation behind sleeping again. So when you say this is that primary occupation, again, the occupational therapist observes this and says, how efficiently is this working? How is this going on all the different levels? And so it's reflective of reflexes, spontaneous movements, innate biological urges and powerful forces that drive the baby to connect at the deepest level, extrauterine, but again becomes one with the mother's body through nipple areolar complex. And there's lots of really good products out there to mimic this human nipple areolar complex. There really are some great things, but nothing is like this human tissue thing to the point where it's very unique. Every woman is a little different. And so it's really neat. So it's also, when you look at, hey, what do babies have reflexes for? A lot of them around the mouth. And so that's licking, sucking, turning the head and licking and sucking, searching, tongue darting, snout response, gaping, all of these different elaborate perioral and even proprioceptive field instincts to feed. These are urges that are coming from the nervous system and who this little baby is as a human. It's very sophisticated. And so it is the exact perfect activity to notice, where are the vulnerabilities? Where are the strengths? Because every baby has both.
Right.
And sometimes a baby is, nursing with someone who has experience nursing, has a great supply and doesn't have any pain, and the baby's gaining weight. And other babies have trouble with lots of different things, with supply, with latch, maybe GI stuff, and they may even have the same level of restriction, going back to tongue ties, lip ties, and buccal ties. It's variable. You can compare two babies with the exact classification, which, remember, classification is really just where they're attached. It's not a functional performance, and there's a completely different symptomatology list. Now the pattern recognition is there. This is kind of the same genre. Head turning preference to one side, postural pulling to one side, a distended abdomen, these different things that we can see, feet curving in or the toes clenching, thumbs in.
I thought about looking at their feet.
Yeah, I got so excited. excited about the feet that I actually literally became a National Board Certified Reflexologist, which was not a waste of my time. Any stretch of the imagination, and became an expert at it. And then I developed the baby reflexology program. So I also train professionals to do reflexology, with babies. It's very simple and very gentle, but it's a great adjunct.
And it's amazing how much is connected there.
Well, yeah. And we talk about the tongue to the toes connection. A lot of people have
Mm-hmm.
heard about that.
Yeah.
That's a physical, thinking
The
about
fascia. Yeah. All the way down.
musculoskeletal. But
Mm-hmm.
when we talk about reflexology and we talk about, the feet and the toes, that'll make sense how like the tendons and that and the fascial structures are connected, but how, the whole body is represented on the bottom of the feet and how that really can be seen or kind of read on the feet. And we can do certain points and techniques to help a baby, especially with relaxing the nervous system and
Mm-hmm.
also helping the GI system. It's really reliable for that. And some babies are quite sensitive on their feet as well. So it's good to know, because if we're sensitive on our hands,
Mm-hmm.
our feet, our soles of our feet, a lot of times maybe our mouth can be sensitive too. So when we work with the hands and the feet, that will help optimize sensory processing in the mouth.
That's interesting. Yeah. And it's funny too, because with I learned it with my oldest daughter when she was little. I was taught where to rub on her feet to help her relax for nap time and things like that. And so I just kind of started doing it after she ate when she was little so I could zip her off to sleep. And it's so funny to me because even as they got older, um, anytime I would sit and do that on their feet, you could literally, I would just watch them. They just kind of turn into this little pool of just jelly. And it was one of those kind of mom flashback things. You do it when they're little and then you forget about it. And then you do it when they're older and you have that moment of, oh, I remember that. But you
That's
forget the
beautiful.
impact they can have on it. Right.
Yeah, and it's sort of a whole body treatment because we're
Hmm.
giving
Right.
sensation to the feet.
Hmm.
It's picked up by large nerves and taken back up to the spinal cord, up the spinal cord into the processing centers of the brain,
Hmm.
perceiving it, interpreting it, doing something with it, and then coming down. So we do have the largest nerves on the bottom of our feet as well. So
Yeah,
it's a powerful
it
way.
is powerful. It's amazing. It's amazing.
Well,
So,
and
and
that's kind of the funny thing though, because if you relax someone and they go to sleep, sometimes it's like they might not be sleeping enough, right? You want
right.
to be able to get relaxed without falling asleep. You can't
Yeah,
help
that's true. That's very true. That's very true.
it.
One of the things, and I honestly can't remember if I saw it in the video or if it was on the website or where it was, but the sleeping tongue posture. So I would love it if we could talk a little bit about, what this is and why is that exercise beneficial.
Yeah, so that's a baby myo exercise that I designed many years ago to address the open mouth, low tongue position that we keep seeing in the face of breathing dysfunction, tongue tie, lip tie, buccal ties, and other symptoms. And what I really like to do is work when babies are doing what they're supposed to be doing, which is when they're asleep, the tongue should be up and the lips should be sealed. So it's really
Right.
working towards that happening while they're asleep, but it's
Hmm.
also a strengthening activity and the tongue pulling away from the floor of the mouth activity and a jaw activity that does generalize over to awake states. So it's done when the baby's asleep
Okay.
and a lot of times held in arms, but it can be done in other positions. And it's designed to strengthen and really get the tongue away from the floor of the mouth and to get it elevated up in the roof of the mouth while the jaw is maximally open as possible. And when babies are asleep, that's the time when we're working with the autonomic nervous system. It's not, their muscle tone isn't really the big thing. They're not moving
Mm-hmm.
around.
Right.
And so this is the primitive parts that we work with that coordinate sucking, swallowing, and breathing. So it's a really powerful way to make some big functional changes. And then also it can be used for as an adjunct for wound care, prep and wound care after frenectomy.
Oh, okay. Wow. Awesome.
Yeah, so it got, instead of like keeping all these things, I was like, let's spread this out and get this in parents' hands because it's
Mm-hmm.
simple to do. And I'm really reluctant as both an occupational therapist and an international board certified lactation consultant to say that I would say the same thing for every baby, but this is one exercise I would do for every
Oh, wow.
single baby.
Okay.
Yeah, because it will benefit every single baby regardless of what's going on. And so I could, do a little example of it myself. So the baby's sleeping.
Mm-hmm.
Now there's two different things you could come upon. So the baby's sleeping and let's say the lips are sealed.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we want to see. But
Right.
we can't really just trust that. So what we're going to do gently is use the pad of your finger
Mm-hmm.
and pull down on the skin of the chin and check to see where the tongue is. We look in and we see that the tongue is up. So what we do is then pull down. You can see I have quite an impressive frenum there myself. Pull down on the skin of the chin to get
Mm-hmm.
the tongue away from the floor of the mouth. And you can see how much range that would take and how much extensibility of the frenum it takes and how we
Mm-hmm.
want the floor of the mouth to stay down. And so it strengthens those exact neural patterns to do
Okay.
that. Now, let's say this is a second scenario. We come up on the baby and their mouth is open and we
Mm-hmm.
can see the tongue is down. So what
Yeah.
we do is use our finger behind the chin and this really soft underbelly, press
Mm-hmm.
up and then pull down. And
Okay.
sometimes it takes some repetition because those tongues sometimes are glued to the floor of the mouth. But I promise you, I'm very good at it. And you know why? Because I'm persistent. I do it 3 times, 4 times. And sometimes it's on that 4th time it finally goes up there. And me and the parents celebrate in the
Mm.
session. And then it's so exciting
Yeah.
because it really, truly works at the unconscious level,
It just
which
becomes habit.
supports all. Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Big
And how
changes.
often would you do it? Would you just do it every time they sleep until you start to see it's just there? They're doing it on
Yeah.
their own?
And this is really where it's individualized. Some babies are going to need it a bunch because of X, Y, and Z.
Mm-hmm.
Other babies are, have more milder symptoms and maybe they only need it 1 time a day, just doing it 1 really good time a day. Because we're busy parents. It depends on a lot what's going on. It
Sure.
depends on
Yeah.
how your baby sleeps and what that is. It's a lot easier if you're someone who sleeps with baby in arms all day long.
Mm-hmm.
But
Right.
that's not everybody,
It's not
everybody's
most
not.
people. Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
exactly. And so it really depends on the baby's needs at this time. But I don't think you could overdo it. I think not doing it is something more to worry about than how many times,
Then how
because
many times?
yeah, I would just like parents, to really try it. And we called it the sleeping tongue posture hold because it helps us to understand a lot. The baby is sleeping and that we're holding what the tongue should be doing all the time. It's just like saying, hey, our posture is upright. We
Mm-hmm.
hold our head upright. We stand upright. That's our posture. Well, the posture for the tongue is we cling to the roof of the mouth, not just here's my little head will go inside. Here's the whole tongue starting at the front of the tongue and the back. The whole thing needs to be really up. And this is the hard palate where the white bone is.
Mm-hmm.
And then this is the soft palate. And you want this really strong elevation of the whole tongue, which helps to keep our airway open and our upper airway patent from the nose all the way to and through the larynx and lower. And a lot of times when we see the baby's mouth is open and the tongue is down, it may
Mm-hmm.
take some practice to get this to change with the sleeping tongue posture hold, but it will if you just persist just a little bit. And
I
there
love
are,
that.
some videos on my YouTube, which are under Michelle Emanuel.
Yep. And
And
we'll put links to them.
good. And like lots and lots of people have taken my classes and learned how to do it and even learned from social media. And it can't really, it's one of those things that you can't really do it wrong. You might not be doing it fully like the way it could be helpful, but it's not. You can't mess it up. Can't
That's
hurt a
good.
baby doing it anyway. And how it becomes part of the frenectomy wound care, if there is a tongue tie that needs to be released, is that you do this and it pulls the wound bed open as much as you can't replace your wound care. It's a way to add to your wound care. It doesn't replace
Mm-hmm.
what your team is recommending, but it's something you can add
Add
that's
to it.
pain free because
Mm-hmm. I
all the
love
other
that. And you're
things are
not putting your fingers
uncomfortable.
in there either.
No. And this is comfortable because we don't have pain when we're sleeping, and because you're not pulling it open, it's the tongue, it's the natural opening itself, and the wound bed can separate and it can feel like gently pulled. Because I know when we're doing wound care, it's like we have to sort of pull against the baby, and
Yeah.
it can be really challenging and also
Stressful.
cause some sensory processing differences in the
Mm-hmm.
mouth.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
So at the end of every episode, I always like to hand it back to the guest for the last word because
Oh.
y'all are the experts. So, what final thoughts would you like to leave with our parents?
Wow, I feel so honored to be asked that. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Well, one, I'm a parent myself, and it's my youngest is 20, my middle is 22, and my oldest is 25. And I felt supported in different ways that I think new moms may not have support. So what I want to leave you with is to find a little corner of the world that you can get support, that you can connect with people who are in the same lifestyle as you. You're having babies, you're all nursing, you're all working on this, you're all working on that, because there are local groups that you can find. You just need to ask around, ask
Hmm.
doulas or lactation consultants, and really get engaged in community, because you start feeling normal for your dysfunctional stuff, and you start, and when you realize that, hey, we work through these problems together, that raising children is, it's challenging, and we,
Yeah.
especially if we're dealing with something like tongue ties, lip ties, buccal ties, or airway compromise, or
Hmm.
breathing dysfunction, or some sort of, even just GI issues. So I think that is the wisest thing that I can say, and what I've learned in 28 plus years of working with babies. And also trust yourself. Now, that doesn't mean we know everything as a parent, but you get the idea. That feels right for my kid.
Hmm.
This doesn't feel right. And really trust that, because that's coming from that inside sense of the gut feelings. And we can really trust that. And so once you lean into that and realize that you really know what's best for your kid, and you're going to lean on experts to give you advice, you'll
Hmm.
feel what's right for them. And one last thing
Yeah.
is, thank you for wanting to optimize your child's health. Because I think it can be really easy to just want to coast
Hmm.
along and not pay attention. But, if you're listening to this podcast, you're thinking about optimizing your child's health, about what can I be doing intentionally and
Hmm.
mindfully, respectfully, and, really helping your child blossom in a holistic way from their physiology and who they are as a human being. So that's amazing.
Yeah. It's beautifully said. Thank you.
Well,
Yeah. And thank you so much for everything that you've shared today. Truly appreciate it.
thank you. I appreciate it. It's been really fun.
Yeah.